the lead pastor intensives, I looked for over a decade to try to find places where people would do the kind of thing that those are, and it just doesn't exist, right? You go to a conference, you go to a lot of seminars and workshops, and it's a lot of someone talking, and you have to try to figure out, okay, does any of this connect with my real world?
Having time with the mentors is actually what makes this 10 times more valuable than any conference I've ever been to. The fact that you get accessibility with context to your situation is what makes this priceless. You're able to bring what's on your mind, what's on your heart, what's on your plate to guys who you look up to and to get their feedback.
What I love about the lead pastor intensives is everyone that comes to that, and it's usually limited to like a dozen lead pastors, they come with their questions, they come with their issues, they come with the stuff they're working on for the next few months and walk away with a lot of really practical help. So
I think this would be valuable for any lead pastor if you're really wanting to grow in areas of organizational leadership, vision, mission, staff leadership. If you're wrestling with anything, please just come to one of these. It'll be helpful.
Do you like guest speaking at different churches?
sometimes, yes and no. Like on one hand, it's a huge honor to be able to be asked to go preach somewhere. And it's also fun when I get to preach something that's I'm familiar with. Like if I have to like really do a lot of prep on an unfamiliar thing, that's not as much fun. And it's cool to see places, but it's also a little weird because it's like, it's not a home game, like at our church, it's like, I know what it feels like on stage. I know the people who are there. I know what will connect. I know what will work. I don't always feel that when I'm a guest speaker. And so on one hand, some people are like even more excited to hear you because you're a fresh voice, right? If you hear someone fresh say the same old thing, the pastor always says it feels invigorating because they're fresh. On the other hand, I'm always like a little like, is this going to connect? Is this going to land? So it's kind of a mixed bag.
Welcome to the Preaching Through podcast. This is the podcast where we talk about preaching the significance of Jesus in 21st century America. And today we are talking about contextual dynamics. Fun. It's kind of a fun
Yeah, we're getting wonky.
We're getting really wonky.
We're in the weeds here.
As you were talking on that intro there, I was thinking, when was the last time you were a guest speaker and you showed up and they didn't have a headset and you had to hold the microphone or even a microphone with like a cable? Can you recall?
Man, I don't remember the last time that happened. I think there was a time, maybe in the last year, where I preached at a church and there were just issues with the mic. Like as we were testing it, it was just not working great. And so I did the handheld and it was fine. That's not my favorite, but it works.
That's what it's like to not be on your home field, though. Like you show up and you're like, what mic do they have for me?
It's funny, though. We, for so many years in the building we used to be at, which we're just a couple miles from an airport, and we would somehow get all kinds of interference with our wireless system. And so that happened a ton in the old days. So I feel like, I'm totally used to that. I know how to do that big time. Like if there was a service where the microphone worked for all of the services, it was like, wow, what a day.
That's funny. Really getting into the weeds. I remember when all the wireless stuff. Do you remember? Like, I'm a tech guy, and I'm a host of this podcast, so I get to talk about this, even if only for 10 seconds. Do you remember when all the wireless had to be replaced? Do you remember that? No. Where the FCC was taking over all of these wireless bands?
That was a momentous time that I do not recall.
That was a moment. Well, the thing is like there are guys listening right now and gals listening right now who are be like, yes, I remember that. We had an unexpected expense of $25,000. But the thing is like because the government was taking it and it was going to interfere with all of the different wireless channels. So maybe you don't remember it because we're still using the old stuff. No, I'm sure the staff here got us fixed up. But that's not what we're talking about here. What we are talking about is preaching through contextual dynamics. And this is something newer to me since doing this podcast. It's not something I had ever considered. Of course, I'd worked in a church for a number of years and I even taught a few times, but even sitting down to prepare those message, in my immaturity, I was just thinking like, what the heck am I going to say? Like, I got to get something down. I have to have something to say. And it really was like starting from ground zero. And so I thought a great place to start this is kind of like a similar ground zero and continuing on that guest speaking because you're coming in, you don't know the people, you don't know the building, you don't know the technology, you don't know the staff, you don't know so many different things. But I know that it's something that you've done several times just as of this recording, in the last 6 months. Talk to me a little bit about what that process looks like as you get ready to preach as a guest speaker in a new contextual dynamic.
So because I don't guest speak a ton, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not like an itinerant speaker. I'm sure if you guest spoke all the time, this might be different. But for me, since I do it maybe a few times a year, I'll typically try to go listen to some or all of the last 2 or 3 sermons that are leading up to my being there. And some of that is just, I kind of want to know what's going on in the church and what sorts of things that they've been talking about. And particularly if I'm continuing a series that church is in, right? This is part 5 of the series they already started. Well, I kind of like to go, what's the language they've been using? What are some of the taglines and ways they've been talking about this? So that's just helpful. And it also just gives me a little bit of a feel for how that pastor is trying to connect with his people, because those people are different than my people. So one of the churches I preached at this summer was in downtown Denver on Colfax Avenue, big, kind of urban area. And that's really different than our suburban context. Wild. I actually ran into some people who I knew from here who now go to church there. So it's not like that different, I guess. But yeah, it's just going like, man, this is a different audience. And even at that church, the evening service was different from the morning service, right? The evening service they had was a lot of young people, a lot of single people. The morning was a lot more families. And so, yeah, it's just really different, even, not just city to city, but church to church and service to service. Like it's different kinds of people. And anybody who's ever like preached in youth ministry knows this, right? You don't preach to youth the exact same way you preach on Sunday. You don't preach to young adults the exact same way you preach to the senior adults. And so you might be covering the same message, the same content, the same core material, but you're going to do it slightly different based on who you're talking to.
So you've gone and guest spoke elsewhere, but you've also had guest speakers come to Ironwood and speak as well. I would imagine you're setting them up in some of the ways you set yourself up, but what does that look like when we have guest speakers?
So I'll send an email to them in advance and just kind of fill them in. Here's the Bible translation we're using. Here's how we handle our slides. Here's what to wear. Like, that's a really interesting question. It's like, what do you wear? Like, what feels normal?
Well, it's especially different here in Arizona too, because it's so casual.
Right. Like a lot of my philosophy of how I want to dress is I want to dress in such a way that people kind of don't notice how I dress. So I just want it to really fit in. Well, it's like, well, what is that? So I'll let them know that. And then I'll tell them, hey, our 9:00 service is like this. Our 10:30 service is kind of like that. And this is some of the differences. And then
really even some differences between the different services?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for us. So like right now we have 3 services. I just misquoted the time. So, but our 8:30 service has the highest percentage of older people. It's not mostly older people, but most of the old people go at that one, the gray hair folks. And it's a lot of our real core people, right? The 10:00 service is a lot more of the people who come a couple times a month. So a lot of the inside stories and like they're not connected to, they're a little more on the fringes, that 10:00 hour. Then that 11:30 hour is a little more like the first hour in terms of like, it's more committed families, it's more committed people. A lot of them are at that service because we only do our 5th grade class at that service. And so they have a 5th grader. So there's a little more folks in that age range of their own lives where they've got a kid in 5th grade. So yeah, it's slight differences. It's not wild. It's not like I'm writing 3 different sermons for 3 different groups of people, but it is interesting how the feel of that room, especially when for me, I'm preaching, trying to read the room and respond to some extent to it. Like I don't just have a script that I'm going through that's not going to change no matter what. And it'll be wild because it's like something will really land at one service and then the next service you're like, that didn't land at all. That didn't connect. And so it's just kind of really interesting.
We'll talk about ways to contextualize your message. And one of the things that you have listed is the illustrations. You've said in past episodes and even in the Preaching Lab curriculum, if an illustration is older than 20 years, is that what it is? Like it's going to require some sort of setup, which you have to decide, is it then worth it to provide that setup? Right. But just thinking the most practical way that makes sense to me, if you've got the 8:30 service and an illustration you're going to use is older than 20 years versus maybe that 10:00 or that 11:30, like that just changes not even necessarily how you would deliver it, it changes what type of reception I think you would expect it would receive or how it's going to land and connect.
Totally. Yeah, like the way that people interact with those things just totally depends on their frame of reference, right? That's what you're thinking about. So, when people think about, pick up a telephone, the way a person over 60 thinks about pick up a telephone is different than the way someone under 30 thinks about it, right? Like people under 30 have only ever like picked up a telephone off the hook with a cord when they were like at a hotel. Right? Like my kids think it's the craziest thing in the world when we go to a hotel. Especially if there's a hotel where there's phones in multiple rooms, they get on and they talk to each other on the phone. And it's like, well, yeah, that's just how it used to be. Right. But so a lot of this conversation and contextualization is thinking about how do we preach in such a way that makes sure that our preaching actually is connecting with the frame of reference that they have so that what we're saying and what they're hearing are on the same wavelength.
One of the things that was making the circa on Reels was go to like a 10-year-old and just do this. Like, what does this mean?
Yeah, put your pinky and your thumb up next to your face.
Yeah. I'm doing it this way. We're on YouTube now. Y'all can watch it on YouTube. But I did it to my boys and they're like, I don't know.
Hang loose, man.
Hang loose, man. Chill.
Yeah.
One of the key differences between how we've started and where we're going to go is this episode isn't about being a guest speaker. This episode is how do you do it in your context where you're showing up each and every week. Maybe set up the rest of the conversation for us.
Well, there is an importance that we're trying to connect to the people we're speaking to. And so contextualization, right? That's this big word, but it's basically saying, how do you factor in the context, the situation you're in, the people, their frame of references? So and sometimes people will push back on it because it's like, well, the word is the word and you should just preach the word and the message is the message and who cares about that? And I go, okay, but here's the thing. As soon as I open my mouth in English, I'm contextualizing, right? If you speak Russian and only Russian, it's not going to help you. If you speak Mandarin Chinese, it's not going to help you. And you go, but it's the word of God. Okay, but if people can't hear it in their own language, this is why when we send missionaries overseas, they spend years and years trying to learn the language, learn the customs, learn the habits, learn this hand signal in this culture that is like fine is wildly offensive in this culture because it's a different context. And so that's really what this is about is saying, if I'm going to preach in Phoenix, it's probably going to feel different in suburban Phoenix versus urban Phoenix. And that might feel different than it feels in Denver. And that might feel different than in Toledo, Ohio. And that certainly is going to feel different than in Istanbul, Turkey. And so you might have the core content be the same in all of those messages, but the way it's delivered, how you're thinking through how to apply it, what the implications are for different audiences, that's pretty different. And so we do need to think about how do we apply this unchanging truth of Scripture to the variety of contexts and the variety of people in our church. Because that's really what all of us as preachers want, is we are not just trying to say stuff, we're trying to say stuff that makes a difference. And so that's why we have to think about contextualization. Every lead pastor I know has read a bunch of books and been to a lot of different events, and yet still we find ourselves stuck in ministry sometimes. It's like, I've learned so much. I know so much. How come I'm not sure what to do? Actually, what we need is a practitioner who can give us the confidence to know that we're on the right path or to nudge us and to give us the strategy to get on a better path. And that's what the Lead Pastor Intensive is all about. It's not trying to fill your head with more content or give a bunch of generic sessions that then you're not really sure what to do with. It's a gathering of a dozen hungry lead pastors with experienced practitioner pastor coaches who are giving you real-time advice on the stuff you are working on. There's not canned talks. Everyone is different based on the participants who come and the questions they ask. So if you're ready to take your leadership to the next level, I would love to get this time with you. I would love to invest in your church and invest in your leadership. We're regularly announcing new dates in new cities, faithful and fruitful, coming to a city near you, and we would love to have you be part of one of these.
What the contextualization conversation gets me thinking of is what I grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s of seeker sensitive. We want to be seeker sensitive. And there was a huge uproar that in order to be seeker sensitive, you had to somehow sacrifice biblical truth or conviction,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe the harder parts of passages that are theologically tough, emotionally tough. Like, we have to be sensitive. So we have to contextualize to the seeker. And I think that rather than being a mode of ministry, I think that's actually just one of the dangers of contextualization. So I don't imagine that everybody feels the same way about this conversation. What are maybe some of the differences or some of the opposing views? Maybe even some of the people listening right now would be like, yeah, you've already lost me. Like, we don't do that here.
So if you're only thinking about how do I connect with people and how do I speak their language, if that's the only concern, then I don't actually think that's faithful contextualization, and that's not faithful mission and ministry. But it is a place you have to begin. So regarding the seeker-sensitive idea or movement, on one hand, you go, that's really great that they're trying to go, how do we do church in a way that connects with these people? Now, if it means I'm now sacrificing the truth, I'm not actually sharing the fullness of what God has to say, and I'm not calling sin, and I'm not calling people to repent, and I'm not talking about sins, I'm just talking about blunders and stuff like that, well, then that's a lack of faithfulness. So I think what's helpful here is to pull back, and one of the most helpful thinkers on this is a guy named Leslie Newbigin. He was a British missionary to India who spent a number of years there and then came back to the UK. And in that time, he realized, you know what, in the time I've been gone, Britain has become a mission field. And so what he talked about was how what the church always has to do in every context is what he called, this was his language, a faithful missionary encounter with culture. So a missionary encounter with culture is always connecting with the culture, right? It's speaking the language, it's learning the customs, it's trying to speak in a way that people understand, right? Certainly Jesus did that, right? The incarnation of Jesus is him connecting, right? Jesus didn't come as a generalized human being. He came as a Jewish man in the first century, in Nazareth, in this time, in this place, speaking this language and not that language, right? Like, he came as a specific person, right? The word became flesh and dwelt among us. The word became flesh and moved into the neighborhood. So that's connecting. But then the second part of the missionary encounter with culture is not just connecting, it's challenging. It's saying, you've heard this is what makes sense to you, but the Lord says this. And Jesus did that all the time. You've heard it said, but I say to you. You think this is normal? Well, here's what I have to say. Have you actually read the scriptures? Because they say this, right? So the faithful missionary encounter is not just meeting people where they're at, it's also challenging where they're at with the truth of Scripture. And so that I appreciate anyone that has that concern of like, well, is this just trying to accommodate a worldly culture? Because if that's what it is, that doesn't feel good. And I would go, you're absolutely right. That does not feel good. We have to be doing both.
This isn't a leadership podcast, but so much of what we talk about has to do with leadership. And it feels like a lot of that processing, a lot of that tension has to be managed by the leader who is preaching. Maybe we'll get into some more mechanics of how you might do that, but are there any just general practice things that you have found have been helpful for you in managing that tension that he sets up there of connecting and then challenging?
So one of the things that we did, and we got this idea from Tim Keller and Redeemer Presbyterian Church. Tim's now with the Lord, but there's stuff you can find online related to this, is the idea of building a contextual profile. So this is something we did as a church. And through the preaching lab, I encourage guys to go through with it. Now, we thought about it as a whole church, and like our whole approach to ministry. And what it really is doing is it's putting together in writing, here are some of the distinct aspects of our particular culture and situation. And in light of that, here's some things that we need to do to try to meet people where they're at. And here's some things that we need to do to try to challenge where they're at, ways that we need to accommodate them and we need to challenge them. And so we really thought about this in terms of our whole philosophy of ministry and our whole approach to how we do church. And so that would be maybe a place to start, is to actually put down in writing, what are some of the ways that people in this community are different from that community, and what are the implications for that? So I'm not going to go through the whole document, but just to give listeners kind of a taste of this, like one of the profile statements that we came up with was this: people in the Southeast Valley have a consumer identity and many choices. They have big homes, multiple vehicles, on-demand expectations, and disposable income with many dual-income families. They can open and enroll kids across school boundaries or choose between 5 to 10 nearby charter schools. Church is also viewed as something to attend that meets spiritual needs and wants, but can be easily discarded or transitioned. Now, I realize that's not wildly unique to the Southeast Valley of Phoenix. Like there's a lot of places where that consumer identity, but that has some significant things, right? So on one hand, here would be a way we try to connect with that and accommodate that is we realize churches with multiple options tend to find more people opting, right? So if you have more services and if you have more programs and you have more ministries in a place that's a little bit more of a consumer thing, well, guess what? More of them are going to engage with it. So that's great. On the other hand, churches must develop strategies and pathways to help people move from consuming ministry to owning ministry. So a huge part of the way we do our assimilation process is to say, hey, we're a big ship here, but this is not a cruise ship that you come to just consume and sit by the pool. This is an aircraft carrier, and we have a job for you to do. And if you're not going to do a job, we actually would like you to go find a different church. Like we'll say stuff like that in our newcomer class. And so like that would be an example of how, okay, we've identified that as a paradigm here, and that affects our approach to ministry. So I could give you other examples through this. I think we have 8 or 9 statements, and we've updated it at different points over the years. But the idea is at some point, if you have that as a frame of reference for how you just do ministry overall, well, now you can think about that when it comes to applying your sermons.
There's 2 big tents then to this contextualization conversation. The first one is over-contextualizing, right? And going too far down what the people are like. And we've touched on it a little bit already. And so that winds up adopting the idolatry of the culture, becoming like the people. The other side of it is under-contextualizing, and that ultimately results in becoming irrelevant. And we don't want that either. Talk to us a little bit about those tensions right there.
Well, a few years ago, I volunteered in our vacation Bible school in the summer, and I got assigned a group of, I think, 1st or 2nd graders. And it's like, I can't talk to them the same way that I talk to the Sunday audience, right? Like you're anyone who's ever,
you
could, but they would look at you even more glazed over than they already do, right? So you're like anyone who's ever doing kids ministry is going, how do I connect? Like, how do I make this understandable for them? So for preachers, it's stuff like I always say, don't avoid theological words, but always explain them. So if I'm going to ever talk about sanctification, I'm always going to define it. I'm always going to explain it. I'm always going to so I'm not going to avoid that word just because it's a theological word, or justification or propitiation or any other word that ends with ation. So it's not you avoid that, but you have to always explain it. And I think one of the best things preachers can do is listen through the lens of, is there anything here that that ordinary people or their friends would not understand? Because that starts to feel like insider language. That starts to feel like, well, now I can't invite my friends here. And that's all so superficial in one sense that it's like, well, that's their problem. Well, but that's not the heart of a missionary. The heart of a missionary is going, I want to preach in such a way that people get it and it changes them and they want to invite their friends. And if I can do that by simply just explaining things, add 1 or 2 more sentences to something that feels obscure and complex, well, then I'm going to, by all means, try to do that.
When we were setting up and kind of preparing our thoughts, you had said that it's very nuanced, but even in some cultures, they'll change the name for how they refer to the Lord to connect more closely to that particular culture, thinking about the Middle East in particular. But what I think there and what I think with what you're talking about here is, does it create more confusion and give way to push people further away from the truth of who God is, or does it put the pieces more together for them and help them out? I mean, that's kind of how I'm thinking about it here.
Well, the reality is, and we can all lament this if we want to, but we live in a receiver-oriented communication culture. So what you intended almost doesn't matter to people. Now, it matters to you, it matters to the Lord, and our intentions do matter. But when it comes to communication, whatever you said, if that's not what they heard, then it's almost like it didn't matter that that's what you said. So again, we can just gripe about that. But I think instead what we have to do as preachers is to go, well, I want to do everything I can as often as I can to not just be understood, but to avoid being misunderstood, because people are just hearing different things. And if I'm not doing some work to be able to go, what are they hearing? When I say this, what are they hearing? Like, I just don't, if you're going to be a good parent to your kids, you try to go, I don't want to bang my head against the wall by saying a bunch of stuff that doesn't connect with my kid. Well, why, if you wouldn't do that as a dad, why would you do that as a dad of the church family? Why would you do that as a pastor? So this is love. This is inhabiting their world. And the nice part is, if you're able to connect with them and speak their language and make it where they feel like, oh, this guy gets me, he understands me. Well, now that opens the door for you to be able to have the more challenging conversations, for you to be able to confront the issues. This is not just about how do you make everybody like you, but it's how do you make people feel like, oh, he gets me, so that I can then go, I do get you. And that's why you need this more than you realize you do. So those two things go really importantly together.
Is there anything else that you want to say in regards to adopting the idolatry of the people and the opposite of becoming irrelevant? Because I want to move into how do we actually start to build and get to know our context, build some sort of a profile. But is there anything else you want to say about that?
Well, the places where this always gets real interesting is on humor and on slang and on different stuff like that, and who are you trying to connect with, and how do you see that, and some of that's hard, especially as the church gets bigger. Is like what seems totally fine to this group of people feels a little bit offensive to that group of people, and so you do have to make some decisions of, okay, I know this illustration is not going to connect with these people, but I'm still going to make it because it does connect with these people, and that matters to me for these reasons. And so it is impossible when you're talking about a large group of people to always have everything you say totally connect equally with every person, right? So that's one of the things that I have found actually kind of helpful about this sermon insight meeting, and maybe we'll talk more about that. But that's a meeting I do with a number of people in our church to give input on the message. And after the first, handful of doing that, it was really fun to see them all go, oh, wow, this is like really hard to say this one thing that connects to all these different kinds of people. And it's like, my goal is not to just have them feel like compassion for me, but it is kind of nice when they're like, oh, wow, your job's actually hard. Yeah, it is hard. You're right. That is difficult.
Thinking about the burden of responsibility being on the communicator, Malcolm Gladwell wrote like a very detailed book in Outliers where he talked more about this. And I won't go all into the detail, but just using the practical example of Korean Air experienced a large number of accidents and incidents when compared to other airline industries. And when they broke it down, they realized that it was because when the captain would speak, there was such a level of respect put on the captain. The captain would say, "What's the weather like?" And the first mate would say, or the co-pilot would say, "It's rainy," but he wouldn't advise the captain on what it is because he didn't want to challenge that. What the captain really wanted to know was, do we have any danger coming up? And so it was just this whole concept of the burden of understanding is always placed upon the person who is speaking, especially in the Western culture. So they changed the entire language. Korean Air only uses English now to eliminate some of those cultural barriers and to better communicate. So I think that's a good example of that coming into real life play. So I do want to start to get into how do we get to know our context. Going back to what I said at the beginning, the few times that I taught, that wasn't even on my radar. I just wanted to I didn't want to embarrass myself when I got up on the platform and preached, right? Like that wasn't even something that I was thinking about. So if that's not something that we've ever really thought about or had words to put to, this is a new concept that we've felt but haven't had language to describe. What are some places that I might start to get to know that context?
Well, we talked about developing a contextual profile, which I think is a really helpful thing to do as a group of leaders and as a group of people in the church, is to go, okay, who are the kind of people we're trying to reach? What do they like? Not what do they like, but what are they like? And what do they like? And what connects with them? And what are their frames of reference? So I think that would be a place to start. I think you have to have a culture of feedback and even critique where people around you as a preacher have the permission, and very often you're asking them, hey, is there anything that would make this better? And one of the things that you're trying to get out of them is, did that connect with these people, right? Because that's the thing is everyone listening to this is like, you're not just a preacher, you're a pastor, right? You know a lot of these people. You spend time with them, and you know the hurts they're carrying, you know the tragedies that are going on, you know the things they're celebrating, and you know the stuff they're into, and you know their hobbies, and you keep track of that stuff to some extent. And so it's trying to go, okay, will this connect with them? Sometimes preachers, I think it feels like you're preaching to your seminary professor. Well, he's not here and he's not listening to this.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the people that are listening to this. So I think inviting feedback, getting a culture of feedback. And one of the best ways to get that feedback is to do it before the sermon, right? So feedback after the sermon is helpful, but it only helps you prepare the next one. If you could actually get pre-feedback, here's some of what I'm planning to say, here's what I'm looking to do, and then get some feedback on the front end. Oh, this is how this would connect with this person or that person or that person. That would be, I think, really helpful. So that's where that sermon insight meeting comes into play. So just a recent example of this, I'm preaching on a passage soon related to the idea of where Paul addresses those who are rich.
Mm-hmm.
In the end of 1 Timothy, he says, to the rich in the present age. Well, that's a really interesting thing. Who are the rich? And who are the rich in his day? Who are the rich now? You can do a whole thing on how people today who are kind of poor are actually rich by worldwide standards, right? How does that all apply? And of course, in there, he's talking about sharing, he's talking about generosity, he's talking about giving. And that's a really interesting thing to go, okay, we're going to challenge people to be more generous financially. How does that hit different people? And in that meeting, I'm having a few of the folks in that meeting go, man, as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about these single moms, and they're naming them by name and going, they are working 2 jobs and they love the Lord and they're serving. And I just really hope that this isn't going to make them feel burdened by oh man, I need to do even more, because it seems like they're just doing a ton, right? And on the other hand, other people are going, yeah, well, but I'm thinking of these people who are kind of upper middle class, probably upper class, and they think man, I can barely make ends meet, but every few months I see a picture of some cruise they're on, and it's they could actually be more generous. Well, how do you challenge them, right? So that's where that conversation as a group of people who have a heart for and a pulse on the church to go, okay, what are some ways that then you can communicate this challenge? Here's what I'm saying. Here's what I'm not saying. Some of you are in this situation. Some of you are in that situation. And if you can get that kind of feedback on the front end, well, now I can actually incorporate that and talk in a I might go, man, I would have never thought about that group of people. I was just thinking about this group of people. And so that kind of feedback is incredibly helpful.
You said the Sermon Insights meeting is research, not collaboration. Is that how you've described it?
That's how I talk about it. Yep.
I think that's great because it allows people to step into that knowing that it might not show up in the sermon, but it doesn't mean it was a waste of time. And if it does show up in the sermon, then hey, that's fun. Way to go. You can kind of nudge the person next to you. But how do you set people up to provide good feedback ahead of time? Because I know there's people on staff, I don't know who, but I know that there are normal humans working here who need time to think about it ahead of time. And there's some people who could not care less if you send an email out a week ahead of time.
Well, we should do a whole episode on the Sermon Insight meeting because in a recent training day we did on that, where I mentioned it, we got a lot of questions about it. And so I think that would be worth devoting to. What I'll say right now is people generally, they know the preaching calendar. So they know here's the passages we're covering, here's the themes we're covering. That's the only real prep I give them. Okay. So whoever's preaching in that meeting is coming and saying, here's what I got. And so some people are more helpful in that because they think pretty quickly. Other people maybe less so. But, as you have that conversation, ideas and thoughts and illustrations and applications and, think about this, that stuff starts to emerge.
One of the things that I think is helpful for me is if I know somebody can offer a lot of insight on something in particular, and I want it from them, especially.
Sure.
To say, hey, you don't have to answer this now, but I'm talking about, or I'm going to be creating, or I need to do whatever it might be. Would you just take some time to think about it, and then maybe I'll come ask you in a couple days? And that sets them up to provide their best. If there's something that you want, now maybe for the Sermon Insights meeting, it's no, for the most part, that's all the research that I need. But if there is somebody that I want something from, I'll set them up ahead of time. It'll be like, I know that this is how I can get the best out of you. And I know this is a way to honor the way you're wired. So let's pivot a little bit now. And what practically, mechanically, do you see as happening different in your sermon based upon the context? Yes, the context of the different services, what you learn from that Sermon Insights meeting. Like, how is it going to change mechanically for you? And I know you've talked a little bit about this, but I want to focus in specifically.
So a lot of it's going to be the examples you use and the illustrations you use. So we mentioned one of the churches I preached at this past summer. I more or less did the same sermon that I had preached here. But what I realized is I had applied it here in a number of ways that specifically related to people from an LDS background and a familiarity with Mormonism, because that's our context. They didn't really have that there. So I had to make a few adjustments to that. Like, I didn't include as much of that. I didn't talk about that as in depth because it was like, people aren't going to track with this. Yeah. So it's that sort of thing. One of the things, just to free a lot of preachers up on this, is I don't think you have to, for every illustration, think about how does this connect with every kind of person. But if you do think, okay, there are certain kinds of people that at least every 4 to 6 weeks, I want to make some sort of reference, some sort of illustration to that kind of a situation or that kind of life stage or whatever. So, for a lot of preachers who are middle-aged, married, with kids, it's going to be so natural to just talk about every story is going to be related to your family and every story is going to be related to your kids. And so that's going to be a lot of those things. Well, if that's you, like that's the situation we're in, we're a church where if you're single, it can feel like I'm kind of overlooked. If you are more on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, you can feel pretty overlooked and I don't belong here. If you're a senior adult, which this is what's wild to me, Dave, is more than half of our church does not have kids living at home. And yet, because the families with so many kids at our church, there's so many kids, like they get the be fruitful, multiply thing, they got that, that we'll have all these senior adults who are like, there's none of us here. And I'm like, you're actually like, there's a ton of you here. But if I can, every 4 to 6 weeks, have an illustration or an application that relates to caring for aging parents, or for those of you who are retired, well, that's going to connect with those folks. If every 4 to 6 weeks I can have some sort of illustration that refers to your roommate instead of just your spouse, right? Well, that's going to connect with more of a single person, right? So it's that. It's not like every example has to, if you're this, if you're this, if you're that, and now all of a sudden your sermon illustrations start to feel like a college enrollment guide where there's like one of everything on the cover, and you're like, I don't know if this place is that diverse, So, but if you just sprinkle in those references from time to time, it does help people go, oh, he understands me. He's thinking about me. He's preparing this message with people like me in mind. And that's all it takes to make people feel like, okay, I'm understood here.
The place where I want to end is the idea of contextualization and preaching to the people who are not there yet. And talking to the people who maybe I want to invite, but they're not here yet, and contextualizing for them, because any given Sunday, maybe I didn't bring someone, but this person did. Talk to that idea.
I love that question, because that is so much of what I want. And that's what we've seen in our church is as we've grown, it's been overwhelmingly through word of mouth. People invite their friends. And so that's a great thing to say, Dave, the way you said that, of like, it's preaching to those who are there, but it's also preaching to those who aren't there yet. And the main way you do that is you communicate in such a way that makes people listening there think, oh, I wish I'd invited my friends. So that is understanding the community around you and going, here's the kinds of hopes they have. Here's the kinds of fears they have. Here's the kind of dreams they have. Here's the kind of people they would long to be, and speaking in such a way that connects with those things and challenges those things to where they go, oh, I was just talking with someone about this the other day. I wish I had brought them here, or that kind of thing. Oh, they would understand this. In college, and I've spoken about this, I think maybe on this podcast before, but I went to an incredible church that just so nourished my faith. And I just so thank God for this church. when I was in college, but I never invited friends to it. I was on a college baseball team, and if I was going to invite them to something, it would be like our athletes ministry, but I never invited them to that church. And I was getting a ton out of it, but I just understood implicitly, this really isn't for them. No one here is thinking about what would connect with them. And I knew if I invited those friends, I would spend the whole service kind of translating while it was happening. And so I'm just trying to go, okay, who are the people in our church and how do I connect with them? And how do I give them the sense that if they invited their friends here, their friends would get it?
Thanks for listening to this episode of Preaching Through Podcast. This is an entire section in the Preaching Lab. So if you want to go through that, if you're looking to elevate your preaching, which I think you're here listening to this, so there's a good chance you're looking to elevate. The Preaching Lab does have a section dedicated to building a contextual profile, among so many other ways that you can elevate your preaching 1% to 2%. And those changes, those improvements, they compound over time. So you can go to faithfulandfruitful.com to learn more about that. This has been a fun episode. Like I said, this is something brand new for me. And it's something that even though I don't preach right now, I'm constantly aware of the teams that I lead, constantly aware of the relationships that I'm in and managing that context. I'll just share one little way that this practically connected with me is I had some friends over who are from an LDS background. And I knew that like when we prayed for the meal and stuff like that, I knew that that was not going to be foreign to them. But I also knew that their Lord is different than our Lord. Mm-hmm. And so I looked for ways to pray in such a way that they would agree, but also kind of, this is a little bit different, or this is a little bit not what I'm used to, just to say, hey, like, we'll pray, but you shouldn't feel like this is the exact same thing. So that was just one little way that I took building a context and prayed a blessing over their family, prayed for wisdom, and we prayed to a very specific Jesus. But thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to us, info@faithfulandfruitful.com. And it's been fun to get back in the driver's seat and have a few episodes, and we'll see you on the next one.